and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
Hey, good morning, church family. Let's open our Bibles to Matthew chapter 6 today. Matthew chapter 6. How many of you were here last night? Just a show of hands. I knew there were a lot of us. Thank y'all so much for your service. As was stated earlier today, we had around 1,300 people. Preacher count, we had around 2,000 who were here last night. And we desire to be a church. It is a safe place for our community where they can come for fun and enjoyment. And to see you show out last night was so grateful. I'm so grateful. In the last few weeks or months in the life of this church, we've had babies that have been born. We've lost loved ones. I think specifically today of Gwen and Nina, who are no longer with us. And I know there are other people as well that we have lost. I love that we can be a church where we come together as those who have experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And we come centered around the cross of Christ, which holds us together through all of our emotions and all of our experiences. So we're in a series right now through the Sermon on the Mount. I want you to start out, I said Matthew 6, I want to start out in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. So if you look in that, and here's what we read. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus says this. In fact, repeat after me. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and give glory to your Father in heaven. Jesus is talking to a lot of people in the Sermon on the Mount who had reasons to lack confidence in their lives. For many of the crowd, many people in that crowd who were around him, these are people who had been sick. There were social diseases they had been carrying. And here they are called together by this rabbi who is speaking new identity over them and then has the audacity to say things like, you are the light of the world, like you are the salt of the earth. And then for Jesus to tell them, these people who had reasons to lack confidence, like, go shine the light of Christ. Like, Jesus wanted them to know that you may feel like you have lived years of your life down and out and that you don't have much to offer, but Jesus is letting them know that they have so much to offer to the world. Like, I hope for me that in my ministry, this is something that never leaves me, this passion, this desire to help share a purpose for you in your life, that even if you feel like you don't have much confidence in your life, that you can come in contact with the good news of Jesus that lets you know not only does Jesus want to save you, but Jesus desires to use every person Jesus saves. And that in this room and in this worship experience right now, there are people who have received a gift or gifts from God to be used for his glory. You have what it takes, like the light of God shines in you and that light wants to get out. Not to leave you dark, but to shine through you so that the world can experience the light of Christ. When I first when Jesus first captured my heart, almost 17 years old, I had a deep desire to shine this light in everything I did. I wanted to go to school. I wanted to witness to my friends. I wanted people to know about this saving love of Jesus. Like there was this calling that had captured me in my life. And I was one of those people who wanted to represent the brand both by the way I behaved and the way I spoke, but also by what I wore. Like I was one of those people who, I went to Christian bookstores. I went to Mardell. Like I bought all their shirts. Like I would buy the shirts that said stuff like, we use duct tape to fix things, God used nails. Like stuff like this, all right? And when you choose to represent the brand, especially if you choose to wear something that bears an image of Christ, whether that's a cross or a statement, like I know last night I saw a few people like faith over fear, like these kind of t-shirts, or you choose to have that a cross on your necklace or earrings, or you tattoo a cross on your forearm where people see the brand, it makes you think twice before you do crazy things in the world. Because when you are representing Christ by what you were wearing where the eye can see it, there are people who see that and they love it and they acknowledge it. Hey, love that you're wearing that. I'm glad we're on the same team. And there are those who are watching that try to catch you in something that disrespects the brand. You know what I'm saying? Like this is why when I go to Grizzly games, I do not wear a Sycamore View t-shirt. Because I don't want you to see your preacher when they go to a commercial timeout standing up yelling at the ref, who are made in the image of God. Some of them are made in the image of God, all right? And I've told you before, like this is why I wear Highland and White Station Church of Christ t-shirts to games, all right? which is the second time I've used that joke in the last 2 years. I got put it on the shelf. It'll be back in 3 years. You'll hear it again, all right? But imagine this. Imagine if every baptized believer, everyone who has stepped into the waters of baptism, had a day where we said, we're going to go and represent the light today. Like, this is a day we're going to represent the light. We're going to speak light. We're going to pray for the light of Christ to shine through us. Like, that we champion this command and promise Jesus gives us to shine this light through us. Now, here's the thing. When you choose to live in a way where you want the light of God to shine in and through you, where is the line of you doing something good for the world so that people can see that you are good, and doing something for the good of the world so that people can see the goodness of God in you? So I want you to feel this tension today. Because when you shine the light of Christ publicly in the world, which Jesus tells us to do, you shine this so that others can see it. Right? So you're not doing there are some things we do not do anonymously. Like, we are doing it in our lives so that people can see the light of God. So when you do you post about it? Do you put it on social media? Like, I think there should be acts of service in all of our lives that never make it on social media. It's just, we're just doing it because it's something God has asked us to do. Now, we need to feel this rub a little bit this morning, this tension. All right, because here's what Jesus does in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, what you see on the screen, right? This light needs to be seen by other people. And just a few verses later, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1, and I want you to repeat after me. And I'm going to keep both of these on the screen so you can see them side by side this morning. Repeat after me. Beware of practicing your righteousness. I need to hear all of you. Get into it a little bit, all right? Before others, in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. All right, so it looks like a contradiction. In chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus is saying, shine your light so others can see it. Chapter 6, verse 1, Jesus is saying, you better be careful that you don't do these things so that other people can see them. Like, there's this command of Jesus that there are some things you do out in the public square for the public to see. Like, people need to see the light of Christ in you, and you need to do this in a way where your heart is honoring God, not trying to draw attention to yourself. Children at a very young age like to impress people. It seems like when our kids first begin to walk or talk, they're saying things like, watch me, watch this. Hey, over here, look at this. And it could be the smallest thing. It's like jumping on one leg, or Lightning McQueen and Mater, like crashing a car. Like, watch this, watch what we do. Look at me, look at this. Shooting a basket in a 4-foot goal or 6-foot goal, like, watch me. And it seems to be something that never leaves us. Because all of us have someone in our lives that we want to impress, right? Like, it could be a boss. It could be a family member, people who may have some daddy wounds or parent wounds, and you live just to have a word of affirmation or approval from them. Right? So here's this rub, here's this tension that Jesus places in front of humanity. Like, hey, there is this light of God that wants to shine through you, but as the light of God shines through you and in you, it's not so people see how good you are, but that they see the goodness of God in you. So we don't live to impress other people. We live to honor God. This is hard. So back in first grade, my sister was in fourth grade. We were 2 years apart. We were 3 school years apart because where our birthdays fell. And I remember one day in first grade, I went home, and Jenny and her friends, they were talking about boyfriends and girlfriends and all this. So I thought, maybe this is something I should step into. All right, this is a great idea. Let me try it tomorrow. So I went to school the next day. I was in first grade with 25 kids in my class, and there were 16 girls. And that next day, I wrote a note to all 16 girls, all of them. Each one got a personal note from me that said, will you be my girlfriend, yes or no? It was it. And I did not hand it to them and say, get back to me at the end of the day. I handed it to them and basically stood over their shoulder to wait. I mean, all you have to do is circle yes or no. This is not something you need to think about. Either you want in on this or you don't, all right? 9 girls circled yes that day, which meant that 7 circled no. But for the 9 who circled yes, I went to school with no girlfriends. Now I had not. 16 would have been too much. 9, just fine, right? But it wasn't just that now I had 9 girlfriends. On the playground for like the next week, I had to try to impress them with some things I could do. And here was my thing. When they were all huddled up, like talking and playing, I would go up, I'd tap them on the shoulder, I'd be like, hey, you'll watch this. And then I would take off on a dead sprint, and I would do baseball slides to impress the 9 girlfriends in my life. I would slide feet first, head first. My mom was I would go home, and she's like, why do you have these massive grass stains on every single pair of pants you own? And to this day, my boys are like, Dad, can you teach us some of the tricks you had with the ladies back when you were little? And I'm like, guys, perfect the baseball slide. The ladies follow, all right? Just do what your daddy did, all right? When I was 21 years old, I joined the church staff. And I was a preaching intern at a church of about 2,000 people. And at this point, I had already preached a number of sermons in my life. But I stepped into this apprenticeship where I preached a few times. I would preach quarterly, something like that. And I had a couple of sermons in a row that they just didn't hit. Like, the response didn't feel good. The delivery didn't feel good. And I remember processing this, and this went on for a couple of months. Now, you may be like, sounds like a typical sermon from you, all right? But I had a couple of months like this. And here's what was happening in my life. I was preaching in front of a couple thousand people, and about 10 of those 2,000 were in the Bible department at the college where I was. And I was writing sermons to impress the Bible faculty, not to speak into the lives of people who were coming to hear a word from the Lord. And thankfully, the Lord convicted me at a young age. Hey, when you do what you do on a Sunday morning in this calling that is on your life, this is not about impressing people with your wisdom or how hard you have studied. This is about honoring God in a way where you are trying to connect the hearts of people to the heart of God. That's what it's about. It's not building your platform or your fame or how much people love to hear you preach. It's that you are preaching in a way where people are coming in contact with the good news of Jesus. Now, I want to walk you through chapter 6 real quick, because there's this rhythm and cadence Jesus uses, and I want to point out 6 flows, 6 different things that happen as Jesus is teaching and instructing people. Now, in your Bibles, if you make notes in your Bible, chapter 6, verse 1 needs to be highlighted, because from 6:1 all the way through 6:18, those 18 where Jesus has 3 different things he's going to address, it's all building on what Jesus says in chapter 6, verse 1. That be careful of practicing your acts of righteousness so that other people can see them. The first thing Jesus does is Jesus says, when you. And you see this in, I think it's verse 2, verse 5, and verse 16. When you. It's whenever you give, and whenever you pray, and whenever you fast. Now, we've talked about this before. Like here, Jesus is not so much a command as it is an assumption, where Jesus is just assuming that people who have committed their lives to following God, that these will be some of the spiritual practices in their lives. Now, Jesus doesn't talk about reading Torah or reading Scripture or many other spiritual practices we can think of, but the 3 he highlights for this example, for this purpose, is generosity and giving, which specifically is about giving to the poor. It's about you are giving because you believe in the justice of God that is making things right in the lives of people here on earth. It's that you are praying, and it's that fasting, some form of resistance is in your life. Jesus just assumes it's going to happen. The next thing Jesus does is he starts with the negative. So it's like when you give, when you pray, when you fast, and then it's the negative of don't sound a trumpet. Don't look like the hypocrites, and don't look dismal. So what Jesus is saying, and I think he's being a little sarcastic with the trumpet. I really don't think people were giving and they're like blowing a trumpet so that people can hear them. But you can probably imagine how this would go down, that there are people who wanted other people to see that they were placing coins or placing money. Maybe they're shaking the can that they're bringing their coins in. They want to make sure that the right eyes see their generosity. And you can see how this would happen. Jesus says, don't pray like the hypocrites. Like when you pray, it's not, really, Jesus is addressing public prayer. Like when you step up to pray, this isn't about impressing people. with the faith that you can pray with. It's that you are connecting to God in a way that's helping other people connect to God. And when you fast, don't look dismal. Some of us are like, well, we can't help it. That's just how we look, all right? But Jesus is saying, when you fast, you don't need to, like, there doesn't need to be something about you that is letting everyone else know, like, look how spiritual and how righteous I am because I'm fasting. And then what Jesus says to all three of those, he comes back to the same line. That's why you have this rhythm and cadence, is these people, they've received their reward. And I think their reward was they wanted to be seen. And guess what? They were seen. You wanted people to see that you were giving. You wanted people to see how wordy and masterful your prayers could be. Like, you could create them. And you wanted people to see that you were fasting. You were seen. And then Jesus comes back to it, where you'll notice Jesus says, when you give, and when you pray, and when you fast, and now I want you to see this. He's going to talk about what needs to be done in secret. Now, some of our versions are different, so I want you to really notice. And I broke this down like straight from the Greek, and our versions, they're doing the best they can to translate in a way that we can understand. Now, with giving, what Jesus says is, if you go, that right there. What Jesus says is that it may be done in secret, but I really want you to see what Jesus says when it comes to prayer and fasting. Because some of your versions, it has the Father who is unseen. But I'm just telling you, like, word for word from the Greek, it's that the Father is that your Father who is in secret. And I think this is kind of significant, because I don't think this is like the driving force of what Jesus is teaching in Matthew chapter 6, but I think there is a piece that Jesus is sharing, is that when you go into secret places, not to be seen by God, by other people, but only to be seen by God, it's not just that God sees you in that place as a place of prayer, or that fasting is for you and God. It's that your Father is in secret. So when you go into those places, that secret place where no one else can see you, it's not just that God sees you in there, it's that your Father meets you in there. He's in secret. And then Jesus ends with the promise of a reward. That for all those who, when you give and when you pray and when you fast, not because you're trying to be seen by other people, but you're trying to honor God. It's your Father in heaven. He sees you, and there is a reward. There is a blessing on your life. And that blessing, that reward may just be you get a little bit more of God in your life. Like, you get a little bit more of God. We go into secret places to be with God because it is there that we discover that there is a filling, not a feeling, a filling that only God can give. And it cannot be found anywhere else in the world. And any kind of praise or affirmation that comes from other people, it is temporary and it is ceasing. But the affirmation that comes from our identity in God is something that will last forever. The hiddenness that Matthew chapter 6 calls us to. This is a call that is not to be hidden from the world. It's like to be hidden from ourselves. So live out your life in the public square. Live your life for the world to see. Because the Jesus who is in you needs to be on display for everyone else around you. But it's to honor God, never to impress other people. Now, here's where this is really hard for me, is that my job is that once a week I stand in front of hundreds of people and I preach 30 minutes or whatever, give or take a few. And there are times I want to help connect the text with you through how I've experienced it in my own life. So I want to be led by God, to be vulnerable and to share stories from my life, yet I need this tension in my own life, not just as a disciple, but as a preacher, to make sure that as I become vulnerable before you or share examples of my life of how I'm trying to live out faith, that I'm doing this in a way that is honoring God and trying to connect you to an invitation God has for your life, never to try to impress other people. So whenever it comes, like even when Casey and I lived 12 years, our family lived 12 years in an underserved, under-resourced community. And anytime I would share a story about living in Binghamton, I always felt this tension in my life. That how I tell the story doesn't need to shine a light on the sacrifice we have made. It's to shine a light on the courage God has asked us to live with. Sometimes I struggle with this tension of whenever I talk about my prayer life, or whenever I'm speaking on generosity, and I may share an example or two, maybe it has numbers connected to it or not, but just what generosity looks like for me and my family. Or whenever I talk about fasting, I don't ever want to violate Matthew chapter 6 and what Jesus has called us to, but I want to be able to share examples of my life that's helping to shine the light of Christ. Hopefully it is coming through me. And I can say this as people that we're all on the same journey, that I think we are a room full, and we are people in this experience today. We are all professional sinners, and I am right there at the head of all of them, in deep need of the grace of God to continue to transform me into the image of Christ. Now, here's what this can look like in our lives. Have you ever received an email from somebody running the St. Jude Marathon and have asked for you to give to their cause? I mean, I get these from a few of you. Every year, Todd Lane is going to run to St. Jude. He's going to send me an email to support the cause. Give, to support Todd, but because we believe in St. Jude. Now, when you give like this, it usually gives you the option. Do you want your name displayed or not? Now, is it a sin to display your name? You gotta love it. You gotta love it. Now, because there are times you may display your name because you want people to know, look, there's no way I'm ever going to run that, but I'm friends with people who do. And that there's a community and there's support, and we believe in St. Jude. I believe God is working in and through St. Jude. So there's a way to display your name that's like, hey, I just want people to see that I'm in community with people who are working for a really good cause. But there's also times we can put our name to it because we want other people to see how generous we are. You got to live with that tension. This is why when our kids lead worship a couple of times a year with Kip, and you get a stage full of kids, this is why the week before or the week of, we may say, hey, we just want to encourage you as a church today. We don't need 50 cell phones up in the air videoing our kids leading us in worship. Because we don't want our kids to think that they are up there performing and that we are watching them. We need our kids to know that they are leaders being used by God, not to draw our eyes to them, but to draw our eyes to God through them. This is why what the kids need from us isn't holding cell phones in the air, but lifting our hands in worship in the air, or a hand over our heart, or eyes that are closed, or some posture that is letting our kids know we're not in this moment today because we think you're cute, though you are. We're in this moment today because we believe that God is working through all generations to draw our hearts to Jesus. Where are my teenagers at? Let me see your hands up in the air. Where y'all at? All right. Teenagers, I think where you need to feel this tension is when you go on mission trips, whether it's Panama or St. Louis, and you get all these great pictures on your phone of how you've experienced God and have served together. You need to feel a little rub in your life of when you come back from these trips. Are you going to post it on social media because you want all your friends to see the sacrifice you made? Or how are you going to use your social media influence to post a picture to point people to who God is? And Tyler and Annika would love nothing more than for you to be like, Tyler and Annika, help us to navigate on the other side of this mission trip how we can honor God with how we talk about this and even post about this. This is why when it comes to Trunk and Treat last night, as you see us post pictures of 1,300, 2,000, a bunch of people who were on our campus last night, that the reason we're going to share some of this is not because we just want people to know that we're a kind church, but because somehow we want people to come in contact with who Christ is in and through the way we open up our campus to them. And this is why in a couple of weeks when we're going to get all of our, you're going to see this whole hallway full of agape boxes and red tubs as we support a lot of kids who are either in the system or kids who are in need of love and resources, and this church is going to rally around a cause. This is why, it's not a sin for you to post about some of those things, but the reason we do isn't to draw attention to our generosity and goodness, but because there is a God who is working in and through us. Are you feeling the tension at all that I'm trying to place in front of you today? There's a couple families, and I'm not going to mention them by name, but the first probably year and a half of COVID, it seemed that every family who would have somebody in their family who would come down with COVID, We had a couple of families in this church who would cook homemade meals for them and would drop it off on their porch and would just either ring the doorbell or send a quick text that there's a homemade meal for you on your porch. It never showed up on social media. They never announced what they were doing. I bet they provided meals for dozens of families and people because it was just out of the goodness of their heart and their commitment to God that they did it. I was a part of a retreat back in 2009 with 9 preachers. And what we didn't know is to go to this one retreat site, put you on a list where they contact every pastor, every church leader, who's it's mainly senior ministers, that once a year, if you've been to this retreat, you get an email from an anonymous person, we don't know who it is, who says, is there anyone in your church who could use a financial blessing? So every year, I get to submit a name. And every time but one, they have responded with a $1,000 check that I'm able to hand to somebody. And me and my friends, we have no clue who this generous person is. And there's a person in this church a few years ago that I submitted a request for, got a $1,000 check for him, gave him $1,000, and they went and they bought a piece of equipment for $995 so that they could serve in some service projects that were being done in the life of this church. Like this person who I'm thinking about, when my sister died, I would sometimes be in my house and I would hear a lawnmower outside, and just this person just showed up to mow yards. Not because they want anybody else to see. It was just what God has done in them has led them to a place where they just want to serve and bless other people. One thing that amazes me about Jesus, and as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, I try to bring this up every week. There is not a teaching Jesus is going to place in front of us in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus is not trying to live out in his own life. And Jesus had multiple times, like throughout his entire public ministry, he could have been wooed by the platform to do things for his own glory, but he didn't. It continued to be for the glory of his Father. Jim Coleman, dear friend, long time, member and elder of this church until he passed away around 7 or 8 years ago. Jim, for some reason, our lunch place became Captain D's, all right, just down the road. I haven't eaten at Captain D's since Jim passed away. Jim is maybe the only person I've ever known who goes to Captain D's and would eat healthy, all right? Like, we don't go to Captain D's to eat healthy, right? We go for extra hush puppies and all the fried crunch, everything, you know? But that was our place. I'll never forget the time we were eating at Captain D's, and Jim said, Josh, I need you to know right now as a young minister, the calling of God on your life is to live for one well done, not dozens of them. And he said, you're going to be tempted as a disciple of Jesus and someone with a platform to live for a lot of well dones, but there's only one well done that matters. And it's the well done we hear from Matthew chapter 25 from Jesus, well done, my good and faithful servant. It's the only one that matters. So today, I want to challenge you this week in your life to live this out, to find the secret place in your life to be with God where no one else will know. And I want to challenge you to live out the light of God that is eager to shine in and through you. And I want us to practice this at the table of the Lord today. All right, so on the screen, there's just going to be 3 statements. And one is this: there is nothing you can do to go to the table and to receive the bread and the cup today that will impress God. Nothing. You were invited because of what Jesus has done for you, not because of what you have done. So receive that as a gift from the Lord. And I want you with the bread and the cup today as you receive it, just to take a moment to do this in secret. Have a moment with God where you were able to express gratitude, and maybe you're able to receive a word from the Lord, maybe something in your heart that needs to be examined. And as you hold the bread and the cup, or take the bread and the cup today, as you receive it, will you be reminded of how the light of God that is shown into your life is so eager to shine out of your life for the sake of the world. And around this room, as we go to tables for the bread and the cup, we'll have prayer leaders, and we are here to receive you for whatever it is you need. Maybe you're thinking about baptism. Maybe there's a prayer we can pray for you. We're here just whatever you need. We're here to serve you and to help take you before the throne of God. So as we head to the bread and the cup today, to commit and recommit our lives to Jesus, will you close your eyes and bow your heads? And Jesus, we thank you for your sacrifice. We thank you for your example. God, for your teachings about giving and prayer and fasting. Maybe there's a word today that will invite someone into a spiritual practice with you that maybe they've never tried or they haven't tried in a long time. So please invite them into those spaces. And God, I just pray for that holy tension. God, I want nothing more than for the Sycamore View Church of Christ to be used this week for your glory. So give us opportunities and open up our eyes to see those opportunities we have to shine your light and to speak your light. But help us also to know, God, that our actions in this world, that it doesn't matter how people receive the actions. This is our heart is true to you, is trying to honor you in what we do. So may we live this week for one well done, not a lot of them. And Jesus, we come to this table to receive from you again your death, your burial, and your life. It's in the name of Jesus we pray.